It is not very common for a sequel to a hit movie to be as good as the original movie or even better than the original movie. Some exceptions would be The Dark Knight, which is a superior film to Batman Begins. Terminator 2 is better remembered than the original Terminator. I personally prefer Aliens over the original Alien. There are other examples, and I think Lethal Weapon 2 might just fall into this category. I don't think it's quite as well remembered as the original film, but I think Lethal Weapon 2 deserves its props as a successful sequel. So let's get into it. Why is Lethal Weapon 2 one of the better sequel movies out there? Lethal Weapon 2 had an uphill battle to climb in order to reach what the original movie did. But did it succeed? Well, the answer is yes and no. The original Lethal Weapon movie had Martin Riggs, a suicidal cop who lost his wife and was feeling depressed, but by the end of the movie, he seems to have gotten over his issues, in large part with the help from his partner, Detective Murtaugh. They developed a bond in the first movie. With the second movie, that relationship having been established in the original movie, they can get going with the action right away, and the movie wastes zero time getting into it. You see Mel Gibson punching the ceiling of a car going, "Woohoo!" As they're driving super fast in a high-speed chase, they go right into the action. They don't even have opening credits. It's just the movie begins, we're already in the thick of it. We don't know all of the details. We don't know who the bad guys are, but it's pretty clear that they're very dangerous. We get a helicopter with a machine gun. And it all culminates in a car crash where the bad guy's vehicle is discovered to have been filled with gold coins. And thus begins the mystery of the film. What are these gold coins all about, and what is going on? It turns out that a South African diplomat is a drug dealer, and he has diplomatic immunity. So that's the plot of the movie, trying to get around the diplomatic immunity and trying to get the bad guys before the bad guys can get the cops. Once the South African drug lords realize that the cops are onto them, they start killing cops. So obviously, Riggs and Murtaugh are put in danger. There are a lot of interesting sequences in the movie that are fun and hold up over time. Of course, there's the famous bomb in the toilet sequence, which of course was parodied in Loaded Weapon 1 starring Emilio Estevez and Samuel L. Jackson.
What's wrong?
Nothing. Taking a shit.
Lethal Weapon 2 succeeds in a couple of areas. Number one, it improves upon the villains of the first movie. Gary Busey was a henchman of the bad guy of the original film, Mr. Joshua, but Gary Busey's Mr. Joshua wasn't the main villain. Now, when the henchman outshines the villain, that's not a good sign that you've written a great villain. The villain in the original Lethal Weapon movie was actually somewhat forgettable. What was great in the original movie was the character development and how Murtaugh and Riggs became friends. This movie continues that, where the friendship grows and deepens. The other reason the movie succeeds is because the characters are already the characters we know from the original film. One of the reasons The Dark Knight is a superior movie to Batman Begins is because Batman is Batman through the entire movie. Likewise, in Lethal Weapon 2, Riggs and Murtaugh are already the characters we know. We still get character development, and we still get interesting dialogue establishing who these people are, so you don't need to have watched the first movie to watch the second movie, but it's great to see the characters being who they are right from the beginning through the end of the film. It saves time for more interesting things like more action sequences and more character development and more time spent with the villains. The villain has more dialogue, the villain has more stuff to do, the villain has a more well laid out plan. The third reason this movie works really well is because it introduces a new character in the form of Leo Getz.
Okay, come on. Hey, loosen up a little bit, you guys. Come on, we're going to be together a long time.
Played by the one and only magnificent Joe Pesci. Leo Getz is annoying. He's sort of the Jar Jar Binks of the movie, but that's okay. He's actually quite a likable character, even though he's extremely annoying. As a matter of fact, you actually feel somewhat sorry for Leo Getz, as Murtaugh and Riggs don't treat him very well. It's actually a little off-putting. He attaches himself to these two people because they're his protectors, and as annoying as he is, the three of them do develop a bond throughout the film, which is rather fun to watch. The movie does go a little over the top at times, which is to be expected in an action film. There's a sequence where Leo Getz and Riggs fall out the window of a hotel room and splash into a pool several stories below, which is somewhat ridiculous, but it works. One thing that's interesting about that sequence, though, is if you look in the background, you'll see a high-rise building, which was the Nakatomi Plaza in the Die Hard movie. So that's one more thing that connects these two franchises. Another reason this movie works is there's an interesting retcon. In the original film, we show that Riggs' wife was killed in a car accident, but in this movie, we realize that it wasn't an accident at all. Bad guys in this movie were targeting Riggs when they crashed into his car, but they accidentally killed his wife instead. So that gives extra motivation for Riggs to chase down the bad guys, even though they technically have diplomatic immunity. There is a romance in this movie. Riggs falls for a woman who works for the bad guys, but she herself isn't a villain. She's just working for the South African government doing her job, and she's not a fan of the apartheid government, so she and Riggs hook up. But Hollywood trope, she gets killed primarily so that Riggs can be sad about it and take his revenge on the bad guys. So these people took two women from him, his wife and the woman he fell in love with in this film. Extra motivation for him to kill all the bad guys, which him and his partner definitely get around to by the end of the film. This movie has an interesting setup and payoff where there's a jokey sequence where he's wearing a straitjacket in the police station with a bet that he can free himself within a certain amount of time. He has a shoulder injury where he can dislodge his shoulder at any time, which allows him to escape from the straitjacket and thus winning the bet. Later in the movie, the bad guys dump him in the ocean, chained up with the intention of drowning him, but that same shoulder injury allows him to escape those chains in a rather Houdini-like fashion. Unfortunately, that's where he finds his dead girlfriend. As cliche as some of these storytelling tools are, they do work in this film, and it is fun to watch. The character interaction between Leo Getz, Martin Riggs, and Roger Murtaugh are all quite good. The comic relief from Leo Getz is a little bit over the top at times, but it's forgivable. Joe Pesci is just a really good actor, and even though he's over the top annoying, he's a believable character. It's not like Jar Jar Binks, as I joked about earlier. This character is believably that way. You can imagine a guy like him actually existing and him actually annoying the cops. But like I said, they get along in the end. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the movie does go a bit over the top at times. There's a sequence where Riggs pulls down a house with his pickup truck by tying it to the stilts that are holding up the house. I would think that if a pickup truck could pull that house down, a mild earthquake would do the same, and if this is Los Angeles, I'm guessing the building codes would be such where if a building was so weak that it could be pulled down by a pickup truck, it probably wouldn't have been allowed to be lived in. Nevertheless, it makes for a fascinating sequence, really good looking action. I love action movies that were filmed before the CGI era, so all of these are practical effects. The movie's climax is in a cargo ship where there's lots of shootouts, and Mr. Diplomatic Immunity gets shot and killed. He can't be prosecuted, but he can definitely get shot. Unfortunately, Riggs is also shot and apparently dying in Murtaugh's arms until he makes a joke about quitting smoking. Those things will kill ya. So we know that he'll be okay despite having been shot. And of course, in subsequent sequels, there's barely a reference to him having been shot here. Overall, I think the movie suffers from a little bit too much comedy. The comedy-action ratio is a little bit skewed towards comedy, but they both work. I wish there was more of an emphasis on action and character development and plot, and a little bit less on trying to make the audience laugh, but it was a feel-good movie. Even though it had lots of graphic violence and death and killing and shooting, it's fun to watch. It's not intended to be graphic and horrific. It's not a super gritty movie. It's not as gritty or dark as the original film, but it is more fun. So in that sense, it's a superior film. It's more fun to watch. It has more action. The characters are more developed, which makes it a superior film. But it's not quite as dark and gritty as the original. It doesn't have that aspect where Mel Gibson is the lethal weapon. His instability in the original movie is something that the second movie lacks. So I won't say this movie is absolutely superior to the original, but I will say it holds up extremely well, especially if you watch the original movie and the sequel back to back. They stand together quite well. And that, of course, brings me to Lethal Weapon 3 and 4. That will be the subject of a future video. If you want to hear that, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss it. And in the meantime, as a reminder, you can purchase my novel Judas Kissed and Becoming Quincy at Amazon.com. Thank you very much for watching.